It's time to chill out and get ready for a mediocre Q&A live stream. If you're old enough, grab yourself your favorite adult beverage, and if you're not, stick with apple juice. Put your feet up and relax. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. And now let's cue up the intro music. Hey everybody, how are you guys doing this evening? I bet you that I find myself critiquing myself and I say like the same thing every single time I start this. Hey everybody. It's kind of like a Mr. Rogers or something, like the same thing every single time, except for I'm not a creeper, but I guess you guys don't know that. But anyways, how are you guys doing? Hopefully you guys are all doing well. It's pretty cold out here in California, man. I almost didn't want to go to work today because it was like 35 degrees. So, I feel bad for you guys that have to work in colder weather than that. But I'm joking. But I mean, we really don't know what cold is here in Southern California. It's very interesting. Our normal temperatures today, I was working in an extreme area where it was like 35 degrees, but normally like down at my house, it was in the 50s. So it's kind of funny how we bitch and moan about the weather, but you guys in the Midwest and the North and back East, you guys are freezing and we're over here in our 50, 60 degree weather. So kind of funny. But hello to everybody that is in here. I see a lot of people saying, hey, how's it going? Do me a favor, as Justin has already said, I'm sure, but let's put your guys' questions in caps lock, okay? As usual, I got a bunch of stuff I want to talk about, and I'll try to get to your guys' stuff. If I don't answer your question, feel free to put it in the chat again. You guys aren't going to piss us off. Just keep putting it in until I either say I'm not going to answer it or someone else tells you, the moderators tell you that we're not going to get to that question or something. So we'll definitely try to get to them all. So I just want to start out by saying thank you so very much for coming into the streams as you guys usually do. A lot of you guys are regular. Some of you guys are new guys. For the new guys, I do these streams to answer the questions that I get when I upload my videos. So we'll try to... yeah, I couldn't imagine that, Ike. Nope. I mean, I know what 19 degrees feels like, but I mean, still sucks. But anyways, yeah, exactly. Mayhem refrigeration. Yeah, I'm a little ways away from Yucca, but yeah, it was pretty. I was up in Victorville today, which is kind of a ways away from Yucca Valley, but it's in the high desert, kind of like Yucca Valley. So yeah, it was pretty cold up there. So anyways, released 2 videos this last week. I actually was on track and actually got 2 videos out like normal. The first one was a The front doors are too hard to open. It was an air balance call. That was a very interesting one because I wasn't able to address the problems head on. I wasn't able to fix what I wanted to fix, okay, because of some budget reasons and stuff like that. But I had to get the restaurant operational. In order to get the restaurant operational, I had to adjust some outside air dampers on some air conditioning units and then also do just some general PM work, okay, because this particular customer had paused their preventative maintenance for a little while, and they're going to be starting them up soon from my understanding. But of course, we got a service call that the customers coming into the restaurant couldn't open up the doors. They had a negative air pressure on that building, okay? So that meant that the exhaust fans were pulling too much air and we weren't putting enough makeup air back into the building. I've explained air balance a million times, but it made for a crazy negative air pressure in that building. And it was actually to the point, and I do believe, I didn't do these calculations myself, but someone had commented on one of my videos, and I believe that they said that from the pressure reading, the negative air pressure reading that I had, they were like estimating that there was 37 pounds of force pulling those doors shut. And I do believe that. That kind of sounds accurate. Again, I didn't do those numbers. Someone had done them for me. I don't know how they did those numbers because I'm not that smart, but hey. But, you know, 37 pounds of force, that seemed about right because I almost had, I went to go open the building door at first and I couldn't open it. Then I had to lean back and put my weight into it, and then the door opened, and then whoosh, you got that rush of air, you know? So it was a trip. But so in that situation, we had exhaust fans that had loose belts. I tightened all those up. Then the balance got worse. Then we had a makeup air unit that wasn't working properly. I had to make a temporary adjustment to that, but I couldn't tighten the belt up 100% because the bearing in the motor is going bad. And when I tightened up the belt, it started making this god-awful ticking sound that I was worried about. So I went ahead and loosened the belt up, but I had to compensate for the makeup air with the outside air dampers on the air conditioning units. Plus, the outside air dampers most of them were all disconnected, so we weren't pulling any fresh air through there. So this leads to a whole list of questions, you know, and a whole different group of things. Okay, so why in the first place were all the economizers disconnected, or the outside air dampers? Well, you know, here, I mean, it pretty much is the same everywhere, but here in Southern California, we have economizers, and it's actually code that we install economizers on units that are like 5 tons and bigger, I think, or 2,000 CFMs or of more airflow. 2,000 CFMs or more of airflow, I believe we have to have an economizer on the unit now. But a lot of times customers don't want to fix the economizers because the return on investment isn't really there. They don't see it, all right? Because we do use the economizers, but at the same time, they're pretty expensive to fix, especially when they're really old ones. So a lot of the times the customers, they don't want to fix them. So when you have an air conditioner that's not working, they just want you to disconnect them. I hate doing that, but you know, I've had to do it too because sometimes customers don't want to pony up to fix the economizers or replace them, okay? So in my situation, I had multiple economizers that weren't working. So what I did was I manually opened up the dampers just to bring in fresh air to temporarily balance out the building. Mind you, temporary, okay? Because I can't let it stay like that. And in fact, they're going to probably complain about some cold dining rooms now because, or they're going to complain that their gas bill is going to go up because I opened up some of those economizers probably 30-40% to balance out the building. Well, now we're going to be bringing in all that cold air, and the heaters are going to be running like crazy to try to compensate for all that cold air. So, you know, there's a give and take from everything. So it is a temporary situation because once this customer is good about fixing things. It's just they got to play with the numbers. They're a corporation. So, you know, when they do, you know, start spending again, then I'm going to put in some quotes and we're going to go in there and fix that makeup air unit. And then we'll go down and throttle almost all those ACs down and just pull like 15% or 10% outside air through each one of those ACs, you know, and we'll pull the majority of it through that makeup air unit. But sometimes you got to go in there and just kind of do what you got to do to get them operational, you know, because they basically, I could only imagine if there was 37 pounds of force. Again, I didn't do that number. That was what someone else did. But if there was 37 pounds of force, how many people came up to their building and walked away because they couldn't get the door open? Old people, you know, that was a trip. So, I see a question right now, and I'm going to answer it. Simon Games, you said, what was my worst experience with Phosgene gas? Well, first off, the technical term Phosgene gas, I'm not super smart, but I believe it only occurs with chlorinated refrigerants, I think. So I believe that there's another term for the toxic chemical that comes from the flame touching other gases too. But I have had situations with phosgene gas. I was working in a restaurant one time, and this was, let's preface this. This was pre-1991, and this was a long time ago, before EPA laws, or the Montreal Protocol, whatever that fancy, whatever, when you could still legally vent refrigerants. Okay, you get what I'm saying there? This was a long time ago. This actually was when I was coming up in the trade too, and I didn't know any better. All right, I know better now. You don't vent refrigerants, but again, this was pre-19 whatever the year was that you couldn't vent refrigerants. Okay, and let's just, to make this safe, it wasn't me. This was a story I heard about someone else that was venting some refrigerant while they were working on an ice machine, and that person happened to be standing on top of a 6-foot ladder. And when that person was doing that certain thing, again, not me, some other dude, all right, and shouldn't have been doing this. When that person was doing that venting of the refrigerant, that person was venting it in the restaurant, and as he was coming down from the ladder, he started to notice that all the cooks in that restaurant were coughing and choking. And that person was way up high on that ladder. Well, that refrigerant fell to the bottom of the kitchen, and it made its way over to a flame, and then it created a phosgene gas. And that was not a good situation, okay? Again, that was a story I heard about some other technician. And yeah, the person that was standing up on the ladder was above the toxic gas. So as they came down, oh no, that person started coughing, ran over, opened up all the doors, and cleaned the kitchen out, and kind of vented it, or, cleared the air. That way people could breathe. But that was a dangerous situation that I had heard about. So there's been other times too where I've been working on a walk-in cooler, fixing a leak, and sometimes you have trapped refrigerant in the oil on a pump down system, or in other situations you have just pretty much trapped oil in the refrigerant. And as you're trying to braze a leak or something like that, you could be in the walk-in cooler, and a lot of times when you're in it, you don't realize what's going on if you have the doors shut around you. So you need to be very careful about asphyxiation, because you could be in a walk-in working and having toxic chemicals that are a result of your torch hitting that refrigerant and creating toxic gases, and you could be breathing that in. And if you ever get that stuff in your lungs, it really doesn't feel good for the next 3 days. It really hurts the bottom of your lungs because it sits in there, and then you start choking it up. It's not good. So you got to be very, very careful about that. And again, that's why, again, I've learned a lot since I was a brand new technician, and I've learned that, you want to be purging with nitrogen when you're brazing and different things like that, because it helps to reduce some of these things. But it also is difficult to purge with nitrogen or braze with nitrogen when you have a pump down system. It can be very difficult to properly purge the refrigerant through the system when you have a pump down system. So sometimes it may be a better situation to go ahead and recover all the gas. So let's see, what else do I got going on in here? Let me see. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get to some more of my topics here, okay? So the next video that I did, so I talked about the air balance. Oh, and I wanted to cover something too. So the title of that video was "The Front Doors Are Too Hard to Open." Now, someone that was not in the trade, I don't think they were in the trade, but they had commented about how damaged the pulley was and how it got stuck inside that belt. You got to be very careful about that, okay? When pulleys get worn out, or sheaves, the belts can get stuck inside of them, and you should be able to diagnose it by looking at the wear pattern on the belt. Joe, thank you very much, man. I really, really appreciate it. So that was an awesome super chat, Joe. Thanks. Do me a favor, guys. Hit the like button. I'd really, really appreciate it, okay? So one of the things that happens, though, is if you have a loose belt on an exhaust fan, on an air conditioning unit, on a makeup air unit, loose belts are one of the biggest things that destroy pulleys. If you have a loose belt that rides inside that pulley for a very long time, it'll actually help to wear it down even faster. So that's why proper preventative maintenance is very, very important. So in the last week, I've gone to multiple restaurants, and I've had to change pulleys like crazy, belts like crazy, and it's all been because people weren't doing proper preventative maintenances, maintaining the equipment, and stuff gets worn out even faster when they don't maintain it. You and I both know that in a perfect world, everybody will maintain their equipment, and and the stuff will last for a very long time and have minimal downtime and minimal repairs. But one of the cool things about being an HVAC technician is there's typically no shortage of work, because a lot of times people don't understand that you need to maintain their equipment. They seem to think that if you just stop a preventative maintenance for a couple months, that it's going to save them money, when in the long run, it's going to cost them more money. But sometimes it might just shift some numbers around and push that expenditure into a new quarter, which to a corporation is, you know, the biggest deal in the world, because sometimes they just got to move numbers around to make shareholders happy. So anyways, we're going on a financial thing. So, all right. Matt Dillon, would I recommend a Goodman RTU unit? Okay, first off, Goodman has a black eye in the industry because a lot of people don't like their products. First off, I will say most air conditioners will work, and they will work properly if they are properly installed with proper ductwork. Hey, Chad, thank you very much for that super chat, dude. That was awesome. Thanks so much, bud. So, you know, again, Goodman has a black eye, and I'm not going to say they're the best air conditioning unit. I've pulled my hair out and been pissed off at Goodman units plenty of times before. They are low cost, but guess what? Nathan, thank you very much. Ike, dude, you guys are awesome, man. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the Streamlab thing, you guys are freaking amazing, man. Holy moly. I'm losing my train of thought. Thank you so very much, man. You guys are awesome. I don't even know what to say. Thanks. All right, I lost my train of thought there. But what was I talking about? That's funny. I lost my train of thought. I guess I'll get back to it here in a few minutes, okay? Next question I see. How long have I been doing the job of dealing with HVAC? Do I do anything else before HVAC? Samuel, Joe, dude, thank you, man. So before air conditioning and refrigeration, I honestly grew up in HVAC. I worked for my father growing up in the trade, and for a brief time in my junior year of high school, I worked at a body shop. And then the tail end of my senior year of high school, I worked at a body shop working on cars because I had an auto collision class in high school. These super chats, guys, you guys are freaking awesome. So for a brief stint, I wasn't doing HVAC, but I honestly grew up from, I mean, as young as being in elementary school, I was sitting on my dad's bucket holding his flashlight for him. Now, I maybe didn't understand the trade, but, you know, I grew up with it. It's in my blood. It always has been. So, all right, Mayhem, I'm going to answer this question for you. Good. You said, can I explain how I wired the key to therm temp plus defrost? Typically, you just see the two wires going to the solenoid. Just curious where you're pulling that third wire from. Thanks. Okay, Mayhem, so here's the deal. In that particular situation, and that was on my walk-in cooler callback video, where I wired in a key to therm temp plus defrost controller. And what I did, Nathan, dude, thank you very much, man. You're awesome. What I did was there was a 115 volt circuit coming from a switch, so a power and a neutral wire going to the solenoid valve, but then the power wire wasn't connected to anything in the solenoid valve. The power wire was just running through the solenoid valve junction box. Okay, we called it a junction box, and it was running to the old thermostat. The old thermostat was a mechanical thermostat. So what I did was I grabbed that neutral wire, or that, the neutral wire, from the solenoid valve coil, and I ran it over to the new digital thermostat. Then I took the power wire from the that was not hooked up to anything yet, and I ran it in. So now I had a powered thermostat. So I had power and neutral going to the thermostat and running the new one all the time. Then I took a jumper wire off of that power wire and ran it to the common terminal within the thermostat. And then out of the normally open terminal, I went back to the solenoid valve. So I know that probably didn't make sense to you because this probably doesn't translate too much on a live stream. But I just kind of made my own junction box using the solenoid valve coil and the thermostat, okay? Dude, you guys are these super chats, man. You guys are awesome, okay? All right, happy Monday. Thank you, 716 Appliance Guy. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get back to my list right here. So my next service video that I did, I kind of already talked about it, was the walk-in cooler callback. So I wanted to talk about that one. It was a little clickbait because it wasn't a callback, but I thought it was a callback. And I got to tell you, when I got that service call, my butt puckered, okay? Because they called me, it's been 2 weeks or something like that since I did the new line set replacement. And that was where I did the line set replacement. It's been a couple weeks, and then I get a service call saying their walk-in cooler's at 50 degrees. And I'm thinking, oh no, there's a refrigerant leak. I'm sweating balls as I'm driving to that restaurant. That was the most excited I've ever been to see an iced up evaporator coil. The moment, and I grabbed, and here's how I approached it. Okay, first off, even though again, you guys, the super chats, thank you so very much. Even though my screen is going crazy, but yeah, you guys are awesome. Okay, So the moment that I walked in the restaurant, even though I thought it was a callback, even though the manager thought it was a callback too, I immediately walked in and I treated him just like a normal person. I shook his hand. I asked him how he's doing, asked him what was going on, quizzed him. And then I said, have you seen anything funny with the walk-in cooler? And I said, why don't you walk in there with me? And the manager walked into the walk-in cooler with me, and we both looked at the evaporator and I saw that it was frozen solid. And I said, okay. And then I explained to him, all right, the only thing that would have been a callback was if the unit was low on refrigerant. And I said, the fact that it's iced up top to bottom, front to back, more than likely indicates that it's not a callback. But I said, I'm still going to go through it, and I will be totally honest with you. If it is something that I did, I will take care of it. Okay. My customers, for the most part, I like to think that they trust me because I'm honest with them, and I'm very upfront. If I make a mistake, I point it out, you know? So it ended up not being a callback. The unit was iced up because the door wasn't closing, which is something that I've already told them about. So it just led from one thing to another, okay? So I went ahead and installed a new thermostat. The thermostat itself wasn't bad, but the defrost clock was. But instead of putting a $200 defrost clock on there, I put a $200 and something key to therm temp plus defrost controller that had a new temp control and a defrost clock built into it. And then I relocated the sensor to a better location to try to prevent the freeze ups as much as they were often, basically. And then I went ahead and talked to their facilities department, and we already ordered a new door for that box. So we're going to put a replacement bolt-on door and get rid of that, we call them dairy doors, but that swinging door, that's going to go away, and they're just going to have a standard one-way open door. So that'll be coming soon too. Usually I don't do the installs of the doors. Usually I have another guy do them because they're just tedious, time-consuming things, but we'll see if I can't do one of these. I've got a couple of those door installs coming up for a couple different boxes, and maybe I can show one. They're really not that difficult. It just takes time. So, all right, let's see what else, you guys. I'll try to get to your guys' questions. If I missed anything, throw a question in here again, and I'll try to get to it, okay? Remember, try to put your questions in caps lock. So, all right, let me see. Okay, Lorenzo, Clint, thank you very much for that super chat. You guys are freaking awesome with these super chats. Thank you guys so very much, okay? So do I make more, or the question is, do you make more money as an installer or a technician? Lorenzo, it really depends. I mean, it really depends. You can make very good money as an installer, especially if you're a good installer. Now, I would say, if you're going to the residential side, and I can't completely speak for the residential side, okay? But for the most part, if you're doing residential, if you're a service tech, you probably have a potential to make a commission. So I guess there's the chance that you could make more if you're a service tech on the residential side. But, I would imagine on the commercial side, good installers can probably make pretty decent bucks. So I wouldn't say that either is better or worse. I actually heard someone talking today. I was listening to a podcast on the HVAC school. It was with Brian Orr and I can't pronounce his last name. It was a teacher. His name is Ty, and I cannot think of his last name right now. I'm sorry, dude. He's a teacher in Las Vegas at NTI, I believe. Anyways, I was listening to a podcast between them two, and the guest, Ty, had said something really cool on Brian's podcast. He said, when people ask him which one's better, installer or service technician, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but basically he said, there's not one that's better. There's one that's better for you, and there's one that's better for someone else. It's not that one's better than the other, because not everybody's made out to be an installer or a service tech. So someone may excel at doing installation and not so much dealing with customers and being a service tech, okay? So then theoretically, that's a better job for that person. So I wouldn't say that you can make more from either one. It's hard to say. I mean, what makes you happy? You shouldn't be doing something that you don't like. So again, I'm going off on a tangent like I usually do and going way away from the question, but sorry about that, bud. All right, let's see what else. Yeah, there are multiple facets, as Twisdom says right there. Multiple facets to this trade. And guys, the sky is the limit. You can do so much in this trade. Do you want to do super technological, scientific refrigeration, working on crazy stuff with weird blends? You can do it. You make really good money. You can work in restaurants like I do. You can work in industrial. You can work in residential. There's nothing wrong with either one of them. Just some of them are better for other people than they are for than another person, basically. So there's so many different facets of this trade. And you could literally work all over the world. You can work in a submarine. You can work, in Alaska. You can work all over the place. So that's one really cool thing about this trade. And guess what? If you learn this trade, for the new guys that are watching this, if you excel in this trade, you will have plumbing skills, you will have electrician skills, you will have really good mathematical skills. You will be an HVAC tech. You will be able to troubleshoot. You will have general construction skills. I mean, you have to know so much to be an HVAC technician, but it is a very rewarding career. All right. Now, there's some places sometimes where some guys are bitter and miserable, but you can't just look at everybody that's bitter and miserable and assume this is a horrible trade, because this job is what you make it. It's what you get or give to it, and it's what you take from it. Some people are afraid to move on from a situation that's crappy, so therefore they're bitter the entire time. All right. But I'm not saying that people should just move on, but I mean, you got to do what's best for you and your own. Okay. So let's see what else. Okay, Alexander, you said once you go through school, how would you get a job if there's no companies near you? Well, first off, you want to talk to the school, all right? It really depends on where you live, but the HVAC trade, I mean, it pretty much happens everywhere. There's got to be some sort of a company near you. I mean, you may have to drive a little bit, but you should be able to find some work one way or the other. You just got to get through school, and the school should be able to help you with ideas too. You know, look on, you know, who advertises to fix the air conditioners in your area. I mean, look at who's fixing the air conditioners. Drive around the neighborhood and look and see what service companies are out there, and you'll find out lots of information. So there's got to be a company around you. Make as much as you're willing to learn. That's exactly correct. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get to some of my questions here. Okay. Oh, wait, Chad, you said if I install a Ketatherm, do you cancel out the defrost timer on the roof and the condenser? Yes, I did, Chad. And that's the reason why I installed a Ketatherm, was I went ahead and pulled all the pins out of the defrost clock. I was a little bit lazy and didn't unwire the defrost clock, which I probably should have done, because that way nothing shorts out inside the clock. But yeah, I eliminated the defrost pins in the clock, and then now I'm just using the thermostat downstairs. And I was able to control the solenoid valve directly with the thermostat now. So that's perfect. That's the best kind of a defrost you can do. The old school, the way that it was before, was just an off-cycle defrost where it shut off the compressor. It had nothing to do with the solenoid valve. So this is actually better. That way it actually closes the solenoid valve when it's in defrost, so you don't have the potential of refrigerant migration. So it's much better this way. All right. When will the HVAC tools videos be posted? I'm looking at basically my plan is to have my first or second video by the first of the year is the plan. So a couple weeks. I have the topics. I have the tools. I've been using them for a long time. I just need to sit down and make the videos. So my plan is somewhere around the first of the year to post the first videos on that channel. So that's the goal. Have I ever gotten customers from my videos? No, I've had people email me and ask me, but I have not accepted any customers from the videos yet. I've had maybe 2 potential ones, but I'll be honest with you right now. I'm so busy and it's hard for me to take on work right now. So I would love to take on more work, but I just haven't been able to. We'll see as this fall or this spring comes. We'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll be able to take on another customer. It just depends on my workforce that I have working with me. So, manually control the defrost with a magnet. I guess you could do that too with a solenoid magnet for sure. All right. All right. Let me go ahead and get to my list right here. Guys, I want to remind you guys something right now. As we come into this season, we're in the middle of the winter. We're in the middle of the heating season. Guys, recommend to your customers and make sure that you guys are doing the same thing too. I can't stress enough how important carbon monoxide detectors are. Guys, if you guys, especially you guys that are working in the really cold climates. I mean, it can happen out here on the West Coast too, where we have moderate temperatures, but carry your personal carbon monoxide detector with you. I'm guilty of not carrying a personal CO detector, and I really should. They're simple. You can buy one, you can hang it on your key, you can hang it on your belt loop, and just keep it on your person when you're walking around. That way you don't walk into a bad situation, okay? I'm segueing into, and also recommend that your customers upsell them, guys, right? The residential guys, there is nothing wrong with upselling carbon monoxide detectors, okay? I don't like the word upsell, but I mean, guys, you're doing them a service, right? And you're protecting your own. You're looking out for them by talking them into carbon monoxide detectors, even if they go buy them themselves, okay? If you're there doing a service call, sell them new batteries, replace them. I don't care when the batteries are replaced last. Just say, hey, you know what? Why don't you let me change those batteries on that carbon monoxide detector just to be safe, okay, guys? And also pay attention too. I'm not a genius when it comes to carbon monoxide detectors, but I do know, and I have read a lot of documentation that say majority of the carbon monoxide detectors that you buy at the big box stores, they basically don't detect low levels of carbon monoxide. So they only detect like the maximum thresholds. So theoretically, someone could be sitting in their house breathing in carbon monoxide and not even know it because the levels aren't high enough to set off their detector. So I'm sure, again, I don't know the names of the brands, but I'm sure there's better carbon monoxide detectors out there that have lower level readings. Suggest those ones, sell them, talk to your company, talk to your customers, recommend the ones to buy, protect them, protect yourselves, and carry the personal ones with you too. Okay. And like I said, I'm guilty of not carrying a personal one. I have a handheld carbon monoxide detector, but I've taken it in, and I actually have a video that I'm gonna tell you guys to look for, and I'm gonna link it in here. Do me a favor, just copy the link and watch it after the show. Let me see, where's my video at? I have a link right here. So I had a video where I had a service call of potential carbon monoxide problem. Oh, Scott, dude, you are awesome. Thank you very much. That is an awesome super chat, man. Dude, thank you very much. All right, so I made a video about a year ago or some change or something like that where I had high carbon monoxide levels, and it was because of a negative air balance, guys. I had a mechanical room that was within the building envelope. We had a massive negative air pressure, and we were pulling the flue gases out of the mechanical room, right, into the building and flooding the building with carbon monoxide. Luckily, nobody got hurt. And because I would potentially, the customer actually called me and said the gas company came out. I'm surprised the gas company didn't red tag the building and shut it down, but all they did was open up the roof hatch and open up the back door and told them to call me. So I walked in with a carbon monoxide detector. If you guys watch that video, you'll see the levels. It's going off the chart. And it was because they had a massive negative air pressure on that building, and it was pulling the flue gases out of the flue pipe and bringing them into the building, basically. So carbon monoxide detectors are a must, okay? Let me see. Did anybody, again, thank you very much for that super chat, Scott. That was awesome, dude. Did anybody get the, there you go. Twisdom's pointing out the carbon monoxide levels right there. So did anybody get the movie quote yet? Did it post it yet? I don't know if it did or not. I always miss those things if they do. All right. So let me see what I got next on my list right here. So in the walk-in cooler video, right? One of the things I want to point out, and this is going to segue into the next topic too, okay? Yeah, that would be. Share this video, guys. That would be awesome if you guys can get the numbers up to 300 people. That would be cool. All right, so in the video where I had the walk-in cooler callback, right? It was a fake callback. I pointed something out when I was hosing the evaporator and defrosting it. I'm always pointing out that I'm trying to think of the customer's best interests, okay? And I noticed that the delivery guy had brought the food into that walk-in and they set it directly on the floor. Yes, that's an inconvenience. Yes, it's not my problem. But as I was defrosting it, I'm watching the water and I'm worried about those boxes getting wet. Thank you, Ike. I really appreciate it, bud. So I was worrying about the boxes getting wet to the point that I went and grabbed them. I stopped what I was doing. I went and grabbed the manager and I said, hey, bud, can you please have them move those boxes because I don't want them to get wet. McCown Refrigeration, thank you very much for that super chat, dude. You are awesome. Thank you very much. So it's things like that that really build the trust with the customer. Joe, you're awesome, bud. Is by, looking at the big picture and trying to think for the customer, right? And trying to look out for their products to try to make sure that the boxes that they had set on the floor aren't going to get wet from all the water. It's the little things like that that I bring to the customer's attention, okay? So, big picture diagnosis. Now, when I say big picture diagnosis, there's another really good thing that someone asked me a great question, okay? And I got it written right here. Let's see, who was it? Try to see who asked this question. Okay, Jason. Jason had asked me, how far is too far with a big picture diagnosis? And that's a great question because that does take a decision on your part. I could be there for days going through the unit. I found a leak, but I need to look for another one. I found an electrical short. I need to look for another one. This motor's making a noise. This blade's dirty. This door's not working. You could just, Pandora's box, right? So there is a point when it's too far, right? So I do look at the big picture and I try to put the customer in the decision-making process and try to say, okay, here's what I found. This is what I'm doing. Jeff, you're awesome, bud. Thank you very much for that super chat. So I try to go to the customer and I try to say, okay, here's what I found, you know, and I try to ask them, do you want me to keep going? These are the big problems. I think we nicked it here, but there's some other minor stuff. Do you want me to keep going? And I keep the customer in the loop. At the same time too, my situation, I'm an owner, but I look at, you know, if you're working for someone, you got to call your supervisor. You got to call your boss and say, hey, bud, here's what I found. This is what I did. This is what the customer wants me to do. How much more time do I have? How much further do you want me to go? You need to get your service manager, your boss, your owner, your office involved and let them know. Ask them. Let them make those decisions. Okay, you know what? That's about it. And then you leave a blanket disclaimer on the invoice that, hey, I fixed these problems, but you know, we got some other issues that I'd love to look into. You guys should call us back and have us dive into that too at a later time. Okay. So there is a point at which you go too far with the big picture diagnosis, but you definitely want to keep your boss involved, keep the customer involved, and know when to stop. Here's how I operate at my company. When my service techs go out to a job, I want to hear from them basically every 45 minutes. That's what I want them to do. I want them to call me every 45 minutes. Let me know, hey, this is what I found. This is where we're going, just so we have an idea, okay? And then they could say, hey, you know what? This is what I found. The units are all dirty. It's going to take me a couple hours to clean them. Then they don't need to call me back in 45 minutes. But I need to know what's going on so that way I can decide whether or not I need to send someone else or just let them be, okay? Now, I'm not saying that my guys have to call me every 45 minutes when they're doing a preventative maintenance or something like that, or they're cleaning all the ACs. But I mean, I just need to keep them in the loop. And I suggest you guys do the same things with your companies too. Just keep someone in the loop. Just let them know, hey, I got here. This unit's all iced up. It's going to take me a couple hours to defrost it. Boom, you're good. Check in a couple hours. All right? Just communicate. Communication is the biggest thing you can do when it comes to this trade and your company. That will send you the extra mile. That will earn you extra money. That will do everything for you. That will build your confidence, or the company's confidence in you, is just communication. Same thing with the customer too, okay? All right, let's get to some more questions. All right, let me see. I see that Ralph's in here. My buddy Ralph is in here, guys, and I always give Ralph a plug because Ralph is always willing to help everybody out. Ralph works for Honeywell Refrigerants, and he's always willing to answer questions from when it comes to refrigerant conversions and different things like that. If you're trying to convert to R22 or from R22 refrigerant over to new ones, or if you're dealing with the new laws that are coming into effect where they're phasing out different refrigerants, Ralph's the man to get a hold of. He knows the regulations. And in fact, it's something we're going to work on for the new year. And I've already communicated with Ralph, and we're going to get someone from Honeywell, and we're going to have a conversation, hopefully, where we work something out where they update us on the new laws and new restrictions that are changing come the first of the year for a lot of different areas. So I'm going to post Ralph's email in here right now. If you guys have any questions, feel free to hit Ralph up. He's always willing to help you guys out. Okay. All right. Great question that I had was, when I'm working in the condensers in the restaurants, what do I use to clean the greasy condensers, and what do I use to keep the grease off the condensers? So first and foremost, you got to understand the requirements of the manufacturer of that particular refrigerator, okay? What I highly suggest is make sure that they're okay with this, but usually I will use a hammock style filter media, okay? It comes in a hammock roll. It's like blue fiberglass. You cut it to a 12 by 12 inch piece. You use a couple plastic straws. You fold them in half. You push them into the condenser coil. You keep a filter on that condenser. But I will say one of the most important things, if they don't do a regular preventative maintenance and you put a filter on that condenser, that filter will plug up faster than the condenser coil if it had no filter at all. So keep that in mind. You don't want to piss off the customer when you go over there to do a repair and they don't do normal maintenance, and you put a filter on there. Leave it up to them. Keep them in the loop, okay? Because sometimes customers just like to let their condensers get dirty. So once you put a filter, depending if it's a really greasy restaurant, that filter won't last a month, sometimes less than a month. So if they don't do a monthly maintenance, you got to make the decision, what's better? What do they want? Because they're going to be calling you back and you're going to be pulling a filter off and putting a new one on. That's great, but again, keep the customer in the loop, okay? When it comes to the greasy condensers, what I like to use is my favorite cleaner is the Hvacr HD by Refrigeration Technologies. It's a safe cleaner that's not corrosive, and it's not going to eat everything up. It does a good job of cleaning condenser coils. Now, if you have a severely impacted condenser coil, what I'd highly suggest is the Hvacr Bright cleaner. It's very similar to the new Calgon Blue cleaner. but the Viper HD is a safe one that's not corrosive. The Bright Cleaner, that stuff will, my understanding is that stuff will eat stuff up. It's just like the new Calgon. Prefer not to use that stuff because it really does a lot of damage. If you can use the Viper HD cleaner, you're best, because if that stuff spills, it's not a big deal. It doesn't burn your hands. It's good stuff. Refrigeration Technologies, I got no affiliation with them, guys. They just make really great products, and I like them. They happen to be local here in California. One of these days, I'm going to go. They've invited me over there a few times to they have a branch in Anaheim, California, where that's their factory. And they've invited me over there. I just haven't had a chance, but I need to make an honest effort to get by there just to go say hey to them, because I really do appreciate the products that they make. So, all right. Yeah, I appreciate if you guys hit the thumbs up button, okay? Next question that I have is, great one. Okay, so when we're coming to freezers, whether it be a reach-in freezer or a walk-in freezer, I had someone asking me a question yesterday, and I was kind of helping someone through email, and they had a reach-in freezer that wasn't working properly. The evaporator fan motors would not run, okay? This one had a digital control, but digital or mechanical, let's talk about evaporator fan motors on reach-in freezers, okay? Majority of the freezers out there, they're going to have some sort of a fan delay limit switch, okay, on the evaporator fan motors. And what we're trying to do, and this is on a reach-in freezer, what we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate the amount of frost and the amount of moisture that may build up or blow out of the evaporator coil when the unit comes out of defrost. So what we do is we will delay the evaporator fan motors and turn the compressor on and get the evaporator coil. This is on a walk-in freezer or a reach-in freezer. We will get the evaporator coil typically, not always, but typically down to about 20 degrees evaporator surface temp before we turn on the fan motors. The theory behind that is that when the unit goes into defrost, there's a lot of condensation, and the condensation won't all necessarily drip off of the evaporator coil, okay? So when you turn the unit right back on and you turn the evaporator fan motors on right away, that condensation will blow off of the evaporator and typically hit the wall and freeze instantly and create icicles and ice particles and little droplets of water all over the ceiling. Okay, so that's why we want to put a fan delay on that unit, all right? There's also some other limit switches too. There's heater safety limit switches and defrost termination switches. Sometimes we might combine a fan delay and a defrost termination switch into one 3-wire click-on, what we call it, defrost termination fan delay switch. That's a very common thing too. So you have to understand how those work. They typically break the common wire on the circuit to the fan motor. But anyways, that's a visual. We got to show that on a schematic, maybe in a video or something, okay? But you always want to pay attention. That's why when a freezer typically starts up, the evaporator fan motor should not start right away. There should be a somewhat of a delay, and then you'll notice the slightest bit of frost on the coil, then the fan should start up, okay? That's proper operation on a freezer. All right, let's see what I'm missing down inside the chat. If there's any questions, make sure you guys are putting them in caps lock, okay? I see a lot of cool people in here. My buddy Adam's in here from the HVAC Overtime. So is Joe. Who else is in here? I see Bill, Curious HVAC guy. There's a lot of cool guys in here, guys. All right. Would I recommend a Rheem or a Rude RTU? You heard bad things about them. Matt Dillon. I've installed one Rude. It was a good unit. I did have a condenser fan motor failure on it, but I mean, other than that, they have a great warranty. I have nothing bad to say about them. You know, I really have nothing bad to say. Even someone asked me about Goodman earlier. I think that's what I lost my train of thought when I was talking earlier, was about Goodman. You know, it's all about how you install the unit, and it's all about the customer understanding that they're going with a lower end unit. If you're going to go with a Goodman or maybe one of these other off brands, a Maristar, you know, those ones are lower end units. I'm sure they make higher end units too, but those are typically lower end units. I mean, you get what you pay for. So if the customer's on a budget and they want a little bit less bang for their buck, then, you know, you go with one of those units. And just understand it's not going to be a Cadillac, but at the same time, you can get the most expensive Train variable speed communicating, whatever, Lennox variable speed communicating, Carrier green speed, and they can have problems too. It really boils down to the way that they're installed. That's the biggest thing. And following manufacturer's instructions. That's a big thing too. So, you know, everybody makes an air conditioner. Every air conditioner will work. Again, it just depends on how you install it, and you kind of get what you pay for. So, all right, let's see what else. Ever work on residential units or strictly commercial? I'm a strictly commercial technician. Is it bad to run a system with all the doors open on an RTU? Yes, it is. Very bad. And it can affect the way, so if you're doing preventative maintenances on the units, you want to make sure all the panels are on. When you pull a blower panel off, what you're actually doing is you're bypassing the ductwork and you're pulling the return air, typically, depending on the design of the unit, directly through the blower. And that blower is meant to have a certain amount of static pressure on it. So at a certain amount of static pressure, the amperage is X, okay? And when you pull the blower door off and you run the unit without the blower door on, your static pressure will drop and your amperage will go up. And you can run into overamp issues and different things like that. So you want to be very careful. When you get into a lot of the big commercial equipment where we have motor protectors and circuit breakers that are protecting motors and different things like that, you can actually trip a motor protector, trip a circuit breaker because you ran the unit without the blower door on. Same thing with a outdoor air section by the compressor. If you pull the cover off of that, and in some situations, you could bypass the condenser and you can cause the system to trip on high head pressure. So it's very important that while the unit's operating, it needs to be worked on by a trained service technician that understands what panels they can take off. But you want to make sure that you're leaving the panels on while you're working on the system. Sometimes you might have to use smart probes or something like that, but you got to do that while you're troubleshooting and diagnosing, okay? And, you know, sometimes you got to block a condenser opening off or something like that so you can see the electrical, but you got to keep the panel shut as much as possible. So, all right, let's see what else. Train Voyager RTU heat failure. Any thoughts? 12.5 ton. That's a hard one, bud. There's so many different things. The train units typically run negative pressure on their gas valves. I mean, there's so many different things. The big giant transformer in there in the RTU unit is typically for the, I believe, for the igniter. I mean, there's so many different things. I'd need more symptoms. Feel free to send me an email at hvacrvideos@gmail.com and we can talk about it a little bit more. By no means am I a complete expert, but I can definitely lead you in the right direction. So can you adjust a TXV with just checking the inlet and outlet temp? That's a great question, Chad. And there are some manufacturers that I wouldn't say manufacturers, but there are some methods of adjusting superheat on an expansion valve without actually getting system pressures. Now, I have never done that. I have heard about it, but I'm not going to say it's a good thing or a bad thing. To me, it doesn't quite make sense, but I have heard that. Okay, so it is something that I have heard. I would highly suggest putting the system, doing proper superheat adjustment and checking it that way. But I can't quote the manufacturer, but I do know there's a manufacturer out there that tells you to adjust the expansion valve via temperatures, which, yeah, it's kind of a weird way. All right, so... All right, I'm going to go ahead and get to some more questions on my list. Todd had asked me about charging a microchannel condenser for the winter charge. He was asking me, his method was to block off the, I'm paraphrasing, so I could be wrong, okay? And let's not chastise anybody, but this doesn't make sense to me, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. So his method, if I remember right, was to block off the condenser to 210 degree condensing temp or something like that, and clear the sight glass at that condensing temp while he was blocking off the condenser. And his thought was that was how to properly charge the system for the winter charge that a head pressure control valve needs for when it floods the condenser. And no, that is not a proper method that I know of to charge a microchannel condenser. So here's the problem. When you block off the condenser and you raise the condensing temp and you clear the sight glass, you're all good and dandy, so long as your condensing temp doesn't ever drop below whatever it was when you had the condenser blocked off. The moment that you bring the piece of cardboard off, your condensing temp is going to drop because you're allowing air to go through that condenser. Therefore, from that point forward, you are going to be undercharged on that system. The proper way to charge a microchannel condenser is obviously lean on the manufacturer first. Call them and ask them what their methods are to charge it. If you're working on a Heatcraft unit, they have a, if you open up their installation manual, they have a method of how they want you to add extra refrigerant, and it's like ounces. It's a very, very small amount. It's nothing like a tube and fin condenser, okay? And mind you, on a tube and fin condenser, I'd recommend using the Sporlan 90-30-1 method, but that will not work on a microchannel. Microchannel is totally different. So lean on the manufacturer, but the easiest way to charge a microchannel condenser, this isn't practical, is to go there on the coldest day of the year and add refrigerant until the sight glass is clear on the coldest day of the year. Then you're going to know that you have enough refrigerant when that head pressure control valve is flooding and it's the coldest day of the year. But that's not practical, right? So the next method is going to be to put the maximum amount of refrigerant in that system. Now, this is actually coming directly from Heatcraft. What they will recommend is that you put the maximum amount of refrigerant in there. Now, the best way to do that is to evacuate the system completely of refrigerant, pull a vacuum, and then weigh in the recommended amount. Heatcraft will typically tell you that this 2.5 horsepower condenser unit has a 14-pound receiver. They want you to put 14, whatever it is, okay? They'll have a number. You put that amount in there. But that's not always practical either, because you're not going to go out there. What happens if you go out there in the middle of the night and the unit's low on gas? What do? Okay? But you clear the sight glass, of course, but then what happens if it gets colder? It's still going to require more refrigerant. So the method that I recommend you do, controversial, but this works, is put the maximum amount of refrigerant in the system. So how can you figure out the maximum amount of refrigerant that system can hold? Well, what's the maximum that you can fill up a cylinder of refrigerant? 80%. What's the maximum that you can fill up a receiver in a refrigeration system? 80%. You don't want to go over 80%, okay? So what I suggest you do is, if you could pump that system down and then check the liquid level of that receiver while it's pumped down, you could feel the liquid level. Now, here's the controversial part. You have to use a heat-producing device, but that heat-producing device cannot exceed the safety limit temperature of that receiver, all right? You don't ever want to do this with a flammable refrigerant. The heat-producing device, I'm not going to tell you what to use, but what you can do is pump the system down and take a heat-producing device that doesn't exceed the soft plug limit or the safety limit of the receiver, pass it up and down the receiver a couple times, run your fingers up and down, and you might be able to feel the liquid line level, okay? The other method that I'm kind of experimenting with right now, and I have had some success, but not enough to say it's 100%, is using a thermal imaging camera. So I have a couple different thermal imaging cameras that I'm testing out, and I'm doing all kinds of different tests where I pump down receivers and check the liquid level with a thermal imaging camera. I did this test about 2 years ago, and I did not have very good success. Thank you very much, Gil. That was an awesome super chat, man. Gil's another YouTuber, guys. Check out Gil's channel too. There's a bunch of cool guys in here. Joe, Gil, Rookie. There's so many different YouTubers in here. Justin will do a good job of throwing their usernames out once we get towards the end of the stream. He usually does. So anyways, yeah, so I'm working on using a thermal imaging camera right now to be able to check the liquid line level. Now, here's another thing. If you ever do a new installation on a walk-in cooler, whether it be microchannel or tube and fin condenser, once you put the right amount of refrigerant in that system, what I highly suggest you do is pump the system down and check the liquid level the same way that I told you. Take a heat-producing device that doesn't exceed the safety temperature of that receiver, the soft plug temperature, and not on flammable refrigerants. Check the liquid level once you've weighed in the proper charge and mark it with a paint marker. So that way, every point from there forward, if someone ever comes out there and they see that the system's low on charge, they know that this is the right amount at, whatever it is. Now, I will say that a lot of times, if the manufacturer tells you the right amount of refrigerant to flood that condenser properly, most of the time it's not 3/4 of a receiver, okay? It's usually like half a receiver or something. But you don't know that when you're in the field. So that's why I say fill it up to 3/4. Another thing to understand, if I'm not completely losing you guys, is if you fill that up to 3/4, you're theoretically putting more refrigerant in that system than it really needs, okay? But sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get the customer going, right? So hopefully I didn't lose everybody on that one. And let's see what else. Let me see. What else I got? All right, cool. Make sure you get, if I'm missing questions, guys, make sure you throw them in the chat and I'll try to get to it. Okay, KJ707, you said you're coming from residential to straight commercial. Are you in over your head? No, you're not in over your head so long as you're taught correctly. Don't let them throw you to the wolves. Make sure that you're doing ride-alongs, you're learning properly, and they're not just throwing you out there and waiting for you to bust your knuckles and break things, okay? If not, you need to have a support staff of people you can lean on and call to ask questions, okay? Ask lots of questions. But no, you'll be fine, man. All right, names of some of the literature on my shelf. Andrew K. Oh, all kinds of great information. First off, Refrigeration Bible, Commercial Refrigeration for Air Conditioning Technicians by Mr. Dick Wers. Very important book. One of the most important books. There's going to be a link to this in the show notes of this video. I always recommend that. Now, this is a hard one to come by these days. This is the Copeland Refrigeration Manual. Guys, this is much harder to come by these days. I've been having a hard time, but it's these blue books. You can Google search Copeland Refrigeration Manual, and there's like 6 parts of it. And there's installation, fundamentals, system design. It goes over line sizes, oil return, friction rates. This is a great, great resource. This is a very old book. It was written in the 60s, I believe, but it's a great book. all kinds of other information up there. Those are the two main books, though, that I'm going to recommend right now. There's some electrical books and different things that we'll talk about on another stream. Some of those books are older ones, and they're I definitely want to make sure that I'm recommending the right books. So looks like we got a lot of people in this thing right now. I really appreciate you guys hitting that thumbs up. That would be awesome, okay? All right. What's the function of a quench desuperheating valve, and why is it important in modern HVAC? A quench? I've never heard the term quench, Twisdom. A desuperheating valve, why is it important in modern HVAC? A desuperheating valve. So are you talking about an expansion valve? I mean, I imagine that's what you're talking about, is an expansion valve that's going to change the state of the refrigerant. That's the best thing I could think of that you're trying to describe there, Twitch or Twisdom. Let's see. What about the ASHRAE novels? Well, I have the ASHRAE Fundamentals book right here. This is the 2017 version. I'm going to be honest with you. This is beyond my head, and it's a cool book to have on your shelf. I think for a brief time, I was part of ASHRAE in some membership form, and they sent me this book. But honestly, this is an engineering book. I've never really used it. I've glazed through it and been like, oh my gosh, those are some big words. But it's a cool book to have on my shelf, but I really don't use it per se in the work that I'm doing right now. So let's see. Oh, okay. So I needed some context there, Twisdom. So you're talking about like on a hot gas defrost, the desuperheating valve that you would put to basically meter the refrigerant. So on an air conditioning system or refrigeration system that might have like a parallel compressor or a hot gas. I guess a parallel compressor system, compressor that you're not going to shut off, because there's some big giant compressors. Again, I'm getting a little bit beyond my area of expertise, but I've worked on them a little bit. You have some big compressors, and they're more concerned with energy usage. You can also use those to control capacity too, when you want to have very low tolerance of temperature change and different things like that, where you can do hot gas injection, or that's the right way to call it. I'm going to stop talking right now because I know where I'm going, but again, I'm starting to get beyond my area. So I'm going to stop talking before I give false information out there. And we'll cover that at another time. So, all right, let's see what else. Why don't we find many EPRs in commercial refrigeration? Oh, Sean Mack, I mean, Adam, dude, thank you very much. I appreciate that $20 super chat that's labeled $500, Adam. That was very nice of you. So why don't you find many EPRs in commercial refrigeration? Well, you do for sure when you get into the big industrial stuff and the supermarket stuff. But in the restaurants, we typically don't have EPRs because for the most part, you're going to see an EPR on a system that you're going to have a very common place that you'll see an EPR is where you're going to have a low temp and a medium temp multiplexed or being ran on the same compressor. So you're going to have an EPR that's going to keep the suction pressure at a certain pressure while the other suction pressure is basically at a different pressure. So that's where you're going to see an evaporator pressure regulator, but you typically don't see that in restaurants very much because our multiplex compressors, you're typically going to have a low temp and a medium temp. So let's see where else we got. How would you go about ventilating a building with a split system carbon monoxide leak? That's a really good question, Matt. Send me an email, hvacrvideos@gmail.com, and I'll look at that a little bit more. Okay, give me some context. Yeah, the Copeland books, refrigeration part 1 to 5. Yeah, let me look. I'm pretty sure it's 1 to 5. Sometimes you can find them 1 through 4. Let's see, I've got part 5. And yeah, 1 through 5 is the refrigeration manual. That's a great manual, guys. All right, let's see what else. Yes, I'm still doing RSES. I just haven't really been to the meetings lately because my wife works Tuesday nights. But yeah, I still send out the newsletters. I didn't go to this last meeting. But yeah, second Tuesday of every month here in San Bernardino, California at San Bernardino Valley College. We have local RSES, the Arrowhead chapter. We have meetings where we typically have speakers come in. It's a free class you guys can come to. Anybody that's in the area. We usually give food for free. We have pizza. You don't got to pay. You don't have to be a member to come to the meetings. You just come to the meetings. If you wanted to join, that's something you could choose to do, but you do not have to be a member to attend our free meetings. So let's see what else. All right, I'm good. I see a lot of stuff going on, but let's put the questions in caps lock. Walk-in freezer was tripping in defrost. You notice the condenser would cut in and out every 2 to 3 minutes. Now the compressor is grounded. Well, you got a couple issues going on there, bud. First off, if it was tripping and defrost, typically that means that there's a defrost heater or something that's shorted in the electrical circuit. But it's also possible that there was an issue with the compressor at the same time. If it would cut in and out every 2 to 3 minutes, yeah, that's a problem too. Copeland actually has some recommendations. I don't know who makes the condensing unit. We used to have a problem with that with the Copeland scroll compressors when they started putting them on walk-in freezers, because the floating seal inside the compressor would allow the refrigerant to move through, and then it would basically bypass and then turn back on and turn off and turn on. And Copeland has a fix where you put in a time delay relay that stops the compressor, but you also need to make sure that your low pressure control is set accordingly too for the proper cut in and cut out. But yeah, there's a lot going on there. If you have a grounded compressor, you obviously got to change the compressor. Because you said it was turning on and off, what I would suggest when you change that compressor is that you change put a dual pressure control on there, low pressure, high pressure. You're going to have all the refrigerant out, so you might as well. And then make sure that it gets set correctly. And then obviously, though, if the compressor is grounded, when you're done changing it, you're going to have to do some oil cleaning things going on with it, too. You need to put a high-acid liquid line filter dryer, like a Sporlan HH dryer, right? Liquid line, that's a high-acid dryer. And then put a high-acid suction filter dryer also. And you're probably going to need to come back and do some oil tests, but you also need to figure out why the compressor grounded. So when you quote that to the customer, you need to make sure that they understand changing this compressor just gets it running. We need to figure out what happened once we get it running. Okay. Very important. All right. Let's see what else. Can I explain a little bit about the low NOx furnaces? Oscar, honestly, I am not a genius. I can give you my general synopsis is that state of California, not just us, but we are like one of the #1. We're super hippie people, and we're all concerned about the environment and all the crap coming out of the flue pipes and stuff. So they're putting these low NOx furnaces that are supposed to be energy efficient without going to a full condensing furnace. Okay. It's a bunch of political crap, and they're changing everything around. But as far as technical stuff about the low NOx furnaces, I don't work on those. So yeah, that's not me. You can feel free to send me an email, and I'm sure I can get you in touch with the right people. hvacrvideos@gmail.com. Did is it safe to spray water inside the box of a walk-in freezer to defrost the sides? First off, assuming that you're a service technician, you want to do this only if you're a service technician. Walk-in freezers can be energized even if the fans aren't running. There could be electricity involved. There can also be electricity in the defrost or in the drain line heater. So you don't ever want to spray water at the evaporator coil without making sure that it's completely de-energized. Second, what you see on the surface of a walk-in freezer, it's much worse on the inside. So just because you get the ice off of the surface, there's a lot more going on. Again, I could be jumping off a cliff here, but from the way that you worded your question, I'm assuming you're not a service tech. I'm not mad if you aren't. That's fine, okay? But I just need you to understand there's a lot more that goes involved into de-icing a walk-in freezer, okay? Correct me if I'm wrong. If you are a service tech, it's all good, okay? But you want to be very careful about hosing off a walk-in freezer or walk-in cooler because there could still be electricity energized on that unit. You can get electrocuted. The next thing is a walk-in freezer. You cannot get water on the floor of a walk-in freezer. Typically, it will instantly freeze. Even if it's only 20 degrees in the box, that water is going to hit the ground. Before you get to move the water off the ground, it's going to freeze and turn into an ice skating rink. It's even worse if you have a raised floor. On walk-in freezers, a lot of times we have insulation that's raised. If that water gets on the floor, it will seep underneath the floor, then refreeze, and then lift up the floors. Not only did you have an iced up walk-in freezer, but now you need to replace an $8,000, $9,000 walk-in freezer floor. So you want to be very careful about using water inside of a walk-in freezer. Very, very careful, okay? All right, let's see. All right, let me see. Suction dryer with bypass. Okay, is it say? Okay, so Bill and I were talking today, and we were curious about how hard it is to get licensed in California. You just got to pass a contractor's license. You do not have to have a mechanical license. You can come here as an HVAC service technician and be working tomorrow so long as you have your EPA Section 608 certification. That's it. Now, if you want to start a business in California, there's like some contractor license requirements. You got to be a contractor for so many years or, you know, in the trade for so many years and all that good stuff. But yeah, unfortunately, California does not have any strict licensing requirements. It's very important that I really wish that we had some licensing requirements, but anybody can start a business basically, and anybody can be a service tech. So, All right. Do I change the Freon system filters a week or two after the compressor burnout? JTH. I don't necessarily go and change the filter automatically. It really depends on the pressure drop or temperature drop across that filter. Ideally, you want to check the pressure drop across the filter, so long as it doesn't exceed, my rule of thumb is typically 3 to 4 PSI of a pressure differential from one side of the filter to the other. Then if it starts hitting the 3 PSI level, then I'm going to go ahead and replace it. Assuming that it was sized correctly, because if you put a very small filter dryer on there, then it could have a pressure differential across it already because it wasn't sized properly. So, but yeah, I'm not necessarily going to go remove a suction line filter dryer immediately. It just depends on the severity of the burnout, how bad it was, and maybe I'll go in there. So, all right, how cold does the evaporator get before it turns into an ice box? Christian Fredericks. That's a really open-ended question, bud. Freezing is 32 degrees, so technically anything below 32 degrees air temperature is going to start to build ice. So, I mean, it's hard to say. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get to a couple more topics that I have on my list right here, okay? I mentioned that, you know, negative air pressure on a building can be deadly in some instances. I think I kind of went down this path. I had a video that I posted a link to earlier about a building that was so negative that it was pulling the flue gases out of the mechanical room. So the water heater was, you know, venting the gas, the flue gases out, and the negative air pressure in the building was pulling the flue gases into the kitchen. You got to be very careful. Negative air pressures can be dangerous, okay? So you want to make sure that if you find negative air pressures in your buildings, you want to try to get them addressed. Now, in some situations, you may not have mechanical rooms where you could potentially pull flue gases in, but most kitchens are going to have some sort of a flame, so you can create some problems. The other thing about building balance, too, when it comes to negative air pressure, positive air pressure, is you don't just, like in my video, I showed I am not a certified air balance person. I was winging it, okay? I did a quick little air balance, just checking some pressures, using my manometer. There's a lot more that goes into an air balance than just dialing in a makeup air and an exhaust fan, okay? You really want to get down into the nitty gritty. You typically want your kitchen to be in a negative air pressure as opposed to the rest of the building. But at the same time, you don't want too much of a negative air pressure because you typically don't want to pull the dining room air across the food that's sitting in the pass out line and cooling the food off. There's so much that goes into an air balance, okay? So I highly suggest that for those of you that are business owners that are watching this, or technicians that want to get involved in air balance, you want to get a hold of a certified air balance company and have them do a proper job. What I showed on my video was something that I had to do to get the customer going, but I still recommended to them that they call a certified air balance company. Now, I highly doubt they're going to do that, but you know, I still make the recommendations. That way it covers my ass because I am not a certified technician to be doing air balance. Christian Fredericks, what does a receiver do? A receiver is a storage tank for the extra refrigerant that our refrigeration system, whether it be an air conditioner or a refrigerator, walk-in cooler, okay, because some built-up air conditioning systems will have receivers too. But when you have an expansion valve, for the most part, well, I can say this for sure, that when you have an expansion valve, there's got to be extra room in that system for the refrigerant when the expansion valve opens and closes. Behind an expansion valve is that it has a sensing bulb and it'll open and close and throttle the refrigerant through the valve when it's needed, okay? So you got to have some sort of storage capacity within that system. Now, in an air conditioner, a lot of times we have a condenser. They don't have a receiver for the most part, and there's enough extra capacity or storage room in that condenser to back refrigerant up into the condenser and for the system to still operate properly. Thank you very much, Dallas. Now, so it's a storage vessel for the extra refrigerant needed for an expansion valve to work properly. That's the short and sweet answer of what a receiver is. All right. Really appreciate that super chat. Why does the receiver store refrigerant? Because the expansion valve needs that extra refrigerant at different times to be able to open and close, basically, depending on the load in the system. That's the easiest way for me to explain that. Again, I'm not the most brilliant person in the world. All right. Daniel had asked me about heat pump operation and how the refrigeration principles still apply. He specifically said superheat and subcooling. So assuming that you don't understand what a heat pump is, Daniel, it's a normal air conditioner. Let's break it down. It's an air conditioner. And all that it does is when it's in the cooling mode, it cools the building. When it's in the heating mode, it cools the outdoors. That's the easiest way to understand it. Let's break it down and make it simple. It has a special valve inside the condenser called a reversing valve, and that reversing valve changes the flow of refrigerant. So the compressor still pumps the same. The compressor on a heat pump still has a discharge. The discharge never changes on the compressor itself. The suction or the vapor line on the compressor never changes, okay, at the compressor. But the reversing valve will switch the lines as they come out of the compressor or go into the, before they go into the compressor, and it'll switch the condenser and the evaporator. Okay. So what happens when we change to heating mode? And remember, I said that in a normal cooling mode air conditioner, we're going to cool the indoors, right? The evaporator is going to get cold. The indoor coil, that's what I should call it, is going to get cold, okay? And we're going to run the air across and we're going to have heat transfer. Well, when we put it into heat mode, we switch. The indoor coil becomes the condenser. The outdoor coil becomes the evaporator, okay? So the easiest way to understand a heat pump is now we're cooling the outdoors. But refrigeration cycle tells us that we've got to reject heat somewhere because the compressor, it builds pressure, it builds friction. It's a high heat, high temperature, high pressure, superheated vapor coming out of it. It's got to release that heat somewhere. So we're now heating the inside because the indoor coil becomes our condenser. Therefore, we're rejecting the heat inside now. Okay, so the refrigeration principles are still the same. Now, I'm assuming that your question, again, because it was kind of a vague question, I'm assuming that you were asking me, where do you check superheat and subcooling? That's very important. For that, we would need to see the system that you're working on because there's certain places that are correct. When you go into heat pumps, you may have multiple lines going to your outdoor coil, and they may have check valves inside of them. So refrigerant might not flow one way during one of the cycles, heating or cooling or whatever. Okay, so the best thing is, again, it's trying to verbally get this across is going to be kind of difficult. But if you can break it down and understand that a heat pump is still an air conditioner, it's just the easiest way is that now it's cooling the outside instead of cooling the inside. Okay, and then because you're cooling the outside, you're heating the inside when it's in heating mode. Okay, again, I don't know if I answered your question completely, bud. Send me an email again and let me know if you need more context or clarification. Maybe we need to discuss model numbers of the unit that you're working on, and then I can give you a better idea of where you need to check those numbers. I will say that for the most part on a heat pump, you're typically want to weigh the charge in. That's going to be your best bet. I realize that's not always practical, but weighing in the charge is going to be the best bet on a heat pump. Looking at what the manufacturers recommend, calculating the right amount of refrigerant for the length of the line set, that's going to be very important, and weighing in the charge is going to be your best bet. So, all right, let's see what I'm missing in here, guys. Did the movie quote come across? I don't know if the movie quote came across. Did anybody get it? Let's see. Yeah, I know. It's crazy, bud. I really appreciate these super chats, too. These are awesome, guys, and really appreciate you guys that are watching. Do me a favor and smash the like button, okay? Really, really appreciate it. Let's see. I haven't seen the... I really haven't seen the movie quote come across, but... All right, let me see what else. Other questions, guys. Throw them in there. Let me see. I know cost is a factor preventing the use of three-phase multi-speed fans, but you want to see direct drive fan with one of these motors like oh, okay, I think you're talking to someone else there. All right, let me see. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get to some more of my questions on here. Oh, great question. Jason had asked me how to size an expansion valve. Again, this was kind of a vague question, so I'm going to answer it as best as I think I could, okay? Jason asked, how do you size an expansion valve, especially when it goes to building a valve? Because in many of my videos, I'll use the Sporlan BQ TEV kit where I'll make an expansion valve. I don't know if I thanked that last super chat that came in. A touch of ADD. Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. And JJ Services. That was awesome, you guys. Okay, I see someone said they emailed me. Refrigerant mess fluid. Okay, cool. Again, I'm losing my train of thought. Okay, so Jason asked me how to size an expansion valve when it comes to a refrigeration system. Again, what I'm going to suggest is leaning on the manufacturer. Okay, Heatcraft. Let's use Heatcraft for example because they have a great website. If you go to heatcraftrpd.com, okay, you can pull up their website and they have a literature tab, and you can literally click on literature and you can download the installation manual for that particular piece of equipment that you're working on. In that particular installation manual, it will tell you what size expansion valve to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up if I can do this correctly without messing everything up, I'm going to attempt to pull up a screen share right now. Let's see. And I'm going to transition over and keep talking with you guys. Let me make sure there's nothing bad on my thing like I've done before. No, I think we're good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and transition this over. All right, so this is Heatcraft's manual, heatcraftrpd.com. And we're going to easily go over here to the literature tab. And we're going to go to installation and operation manuals. Super easy, guys. Go down here to unit coolers, installation and operation manual. And then open this up. This is the manual you would get with a condensing unit. Scroll down. It tells you how to position. I mean, all you got to do is read the manual. It tells you how to install them, what to go through, how to adjust the superheat, what kind of superheat they're looking for. And look right here, expansion valve selection. But here's the important thing. Notice that it says expansion valve selection with 180 PSI head pressure valve or with 150 PSI head pressure valve. It's important to understand if the unit has a head pressure control valve, which they typically do on the Heatcraft units, that you need to size the expansion valve correctly. So what you do right here is find your evaporator TD. This only applies if you're running a 10-degree evaporator TD. If your system's been specifically engineered to run a 15-degree TD, then you're going to need to lean on the manufacturer to figure out what size valves to use, okay? Let me make sure that, okay, cool. So if you look right here, it tells you that if we're working on a 404 system, 448 system, here's the evaporator temps, -20 plus 25, and you go down and you find your BTU capacity of your evaporator, 17,000 BTUs. You know, it's going to tell you what size valve to use. Now, the reason why I'm recommending that you guys lean on the manufacturer is because sometimes manufacturers will put distributors in their units and the distributor is not sized correctly for another valve. So you always want to lean on the manufacturer first. Another great resource is a very obvious one is sporlinonline.com, the maker of the expansion valves. Okay, Sporlin has one of the best resources for product information when it comes to liquid dryers, solenoid valves, expansion valves. All you got to do is go here to literature. It's easy. Thermostatic expansion valves. Boom. And then guess what? There's going to be a crap ton of bulletins right here. Theory of operation, all the different stuff, guys. Lean on the manufacturers. They have great resources. Sporlin is one of the best ones. I really do like working with Sporlin because they have great information. I'm going to go ahead and transition back on over. That seems like it went okay without me screwing everything up. All right. All right, guys. So lean on the manufacturer. They're the best person to get the information from. And then Sporlin has an amazing website with lots of great resources when it comes to expansion valves, any kind of valve that Sporlin makes. They have some of the best resources out there on their website. So check it out. Sporlin also has a podcast, guys, and they have great online resources and they do webinars. So just check out their website and just search around. You'll find all kinds of great stuff on their website. Really appreciate it, Jason. Hopefully I answered it correctly for you, okay? What happens if you oversize an expansion valve? Well, you can have all kinds of issues, but theoretically, if you oversize it enough, you could flood liquid back to your compressor, because if the expansion valve is got a big enough port on it and it can't control the superheat, you might flood too much refrigerant through that coil. The refrigerant might not boil off correctly, and it might make its way back up to the compressor. Likewise, if you put an expansion valve that's too small, you could starve the evaporator and starve the compressor. I mean, you can have all kinds of problems. So you have to make sure that you size your valves correctly. There is a margin of error there, but you got to be careful about that, okay? How do you know if the compressor is internally bypassing? Hashim Wahid. Well, if it's a Copeland compressor, you've got some good luck because Copeland has a mobile app. It's called Copeland Mobile. And they have great resources, and you could input some great information into their website. And let me see if I can pull something up right now. Let me look something up right now. Copeland Mobile Desktop. So you can download a mobile app called Copeland Mobile. But they also have a desktop version. That's not it right there. Let me see if I can pull it up here real quick. Yeah, there we go. Desktop. I think this might be it. Let's click on that. And here we go. Okay, this is what we're going to do. Why is it making me log in? I don't want to log in. Never mind. I'm not going to pull up a screen share on this right now, but just check out copelandmobile.com. All right. They'll be able to help you to size that. Do we ever tell cheap customers to find someone else? Yeah, I've told a couple customers to go pound sand before. Christian Fredericks, you saw a Hoshizaki soda machine at McDonald's last night. As soon as you saw it, you thought about me. Yeah, luckily I don't work on the ones at McDonald's or those little fast food places. But yeah, those you got to give those guys props. You notice so many people think that RLA is the maximum amount of current a compressor will draw. It's a huge misconception. You've seen nobody get it right. What I would highly suggest you do, because the current draw of the compressor is going to change dependent on the load that's on the system. So you do need to be careful about that. What I would highly suggest you do is check out the Copeland mobile app, especially if you're working on a compressor, a Copeland compressor. They do a good job of helping you to understand what your amp should be, how it should be running. Very important. All right. Let me look at my questions here on my list. Let's see. Dan had asked me about getting into the trade, but not wanting to go onto the pitched roofs was his thing, okay? And he wanted to know, he really wants to get into HVAC, but he's a little bit afraid of getting on some roofs, okay? Certain roofs. That's going to be a hard one, Dan, but it is possible, okay? You can get into this trade and work indoors and not necessarily have to get onto a roof, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to find a job, okay? In order to get into this trade, one of the first things that I do when I'm working with a new technician is I throw an extension ladder up on the side of the building and I tell them to start climbing up. Get used to it, because you got to get used to climbing ladders. You got to get used to trusting your ladders and knowing what's on the roof. Obviously, you don't want to put yourselves into a dangerous situation. Pitched roofs can be kind of sketchy. There's a lot of different OSHA requirements that you need to follow when you're working on pitched roofs. So there's lots of safety things that you could do to protect yourself when you're on a funky pitched roof. But for the most part, on the commercial side, you're not going to be working on funky pitched roofs. You're going to be working on flat roofs for the most part. Some of the residential stuff, you might be working on some pitched roofs, so you need to be careful about that. But you certainly can survive in this trade. You're just going to have to pick a few different things and maybe go with an in-house maintenance position or something like that. Let me see what else I'm missing here. What is going on? Right on. All right. Does oversizing the filter dryer hurt? Hashim. Yes and no. Okay. If it is a critically charged system, let's say we're working on an R290 refrigerator and you put a filter dryer on there that's 3 cubic inch. Well, R290 systems are extremely small, and a 3 cubic inch filter dryer might be too big for an R290 system. So yes, if it's a critically charged system, you can oversize it. You would have to compensate by adding extra refrigerant to the system, okay? It would still operate, but you'd have to add extra refrigerant. As far as like a walk-in cooler, no. I mean, but you do understand in the same principle, walk-in coolers have a little more forgiveness when it comes to refrigerant charge because we have a giant storage tank that stores the refrigerant in it. But, you know, you can pretty much put as big of a filter dryer on a walk-in cooler as you want, depending on the space, but you certainly can go undersized on a filter dryer. That's where you really need to be careful. But you can put a big filter dryer. I mean, I put oversized filter dryers. Now, remember something. When it comes to sizing filter dryers, let's say you have a residential, no, not residential. Let's say you have a commercial system and you have a liquid line coming off of the receiver, all right, going down to the expansion valve. And that's typically we're going to install the filter dryer somewhere between the receiver and the expansion valve, theoretically as close to the expansion valve as possible, but not always necessary, all right? So let's say that the liquid line coming off the receiver is 7/8 inch liquid line. You do not size that filter dryer based off of the liquid line size. That's not how it works, okay? You keep that in mind, but you don't have to just look at the liquid line size to size the filter dryer. So long as you have the proper flow, all right? Maybe that line size is too big. So long as you have the proper flow and not a pressure drop, you can put a smaller size filter dryer, okay? Same thing goes with, where was I going with this? Solenoid valves too, okay? Let's say you have a solenoid valve, liquid line solenoid valve, and you've got that same 7/8 inch liquid line, right? And the solenoid valve will typically go, again, similar to where the filter dryer is. The solenoid valve might go between the receiver and the expansion valve. Just because you have a 7/8 inch liquid line does not mean that you're going to have a 7/8 inch solenoid valve. Again, solenoid valves are even more critical because the pressure differential is what's going to affect that valve opening and closing across that valve, the pressure drop, okay? So filter dryers, you typically want to stick to the same line size, but you don't always have to, depending on the amount of velocity you need to be going through that refrigerant line, but especially on a liquid line solenoid valve, you do not always just look at the line size, okay? You want to know the amount of refrigerant you need going through that, the amount, the pressure drop that needs to be there, and that's how you size a solenoid valve. Theoretically, same thing with a filter dryer too, okay? So, why is the liquid line sized as such? Because we need a proper amount of, you need a proper pressure differential basically going to your expansion valve, and you need to have proper refrigerant flow, the correct amount of refrigerant and refrigerant velocity going through the going to the expansion valve too. But the biggest thing is that your expansion valve has to have a proper pressure differential across the valve. The way the expansion valve works, I've got one right here, okay? This is a pressure differential valve. It changes the state of refrigerant from a liquid to a vapor or a vapor mixture, okay? The pressure differential across this valve has to be a set pressure differential. Think about it like this, okay? The easiest way to explain this expansion valve. Think about a garden hose in front of your house. You take a garden hose, you put your finger over the garden hose, and the water shoots 4 feet, right? But you take your finger off and the water just trickles out of the hose, okay? You're creating a pressure differential and you're allowing that refrigerant to disperse at a higher rate. This expansion valve theoretically does the same thing. It brings in a warm liquid refrigerant into the valve, and it disperses that refrigerant through the valve. It has to have a set pressure differential. Unlike your finger, you can move across the water hose. This thing will not operate properly, especially the thermostatic expansion valves, if it doesn't have the proper pressure differential, okay? You got to have a certain amount of difference between the liquid line pressure and the outlet pressure of this valve for it to feed correctly and meter the refrigerant correctly. So if we have a filter dryer or a liquid line that is sized too small, then we're going to affect the pressure differential and the amount of refrigerant that's being fed to this valve. Therefore, this valve is not going to feed refrigerant into the evaporator coil properly. Therefore, you're not going to evaporate the refrigerant. You're not going to absorb the heat correctly. And therefore, you're not going to cool your compressor, because our compressors typically are refrigerant cooled. The suction gas coming back to the compressor typically on most of our systems is what cools that compressor off. So if you have a restriction in the system, if you have an expansion valve that's not feeding properly, if you're starving the system, you're going to have a high superheat coming back to your compressor, and you're going to run into overheat issues too. The whole system works as a giant envelope, and it all works together. And if one thing fails in the system, that flow is not happening anymore. So, all right. Let me see what else. If you don't, I don't know what you're looking for there, Twisdom. What's the answer you're looking for when you say a set differential? You want to know why we size lines as such. Tell me what you're trying to say. I don't know where you're going with that one. How do you clean capillary tube without changing? Hashim, it's not a good idea, dude. If your capillary tube's plugged up, the easiest way, they do make tools to clean them, but the easiest way is going to be to go ahead and replace the cap tube. But you got to figure out why the cap tube plugged up. Majority of the time, the reason why cap tube's plugged up is because the oil in the system becomes contaminated, and it's nasty inside there. And you change the cap tube, and it's going to plug up again. So depending on the severity, you might actually, this isn't really going to make sense on a reach-in cooler. You typically will change the condensing unit as a whole and change the capillary tube, pull a good evacuation, and make sure they keep the condenser clean, because that's typically what ruins the oil and causes cap tubes to plug up, is when people don't maintain and clean their condensers. All right, that's why you need a quench. Okay, I still don't know where you're going with that, Twisdom. Doesn't oversizing evaporator coils and condenser coils make lower temperature and better performance? No, not necessarily, Christian, because it all depends on what you're trying to do. There's some people out there that size and undersize and oversize things depending on humidity and different stuff like that, but that's getting way engineering level, okay? For the most part, we want to match our systems, especially when it comes to refrigeration. We want to match our systems as far as the BTU output of the condensing unit. We want it to be relatively close to the BTU capacity of the evaporator coil too. Let's see. How do you size the cap tube length? It's based off of the manufacturer's recommendation, and let me see what I'm missing in here. Yeah, based off the manufacturer's recommendation. Now, there is cap tube sizing charts on the back of the box of capillary tube. I highly suggest you don't lean on those, and that you lean on the manufacturer of the refrigerator. Cap tube sizing charts can possibly get you in the ballpark, but your best bet is going to see how the manufacturer, what size evaporator they put in that system, to know what size metering device, capillary tube, you're going to put on that system. So some manufacturers kind of do some funky things and beat to the tune of their own drum when it comes to refrigerators, especially little prep tables. So you don't want to necessarily lean on the cap tube box. You want to lean to the manufacturer of the refrigerator. During a cold outdoor air temps with a walk-in cooler using a fan cycle. What are you asking there, Jacob? Did I miss something you had said earlier? I don't know. All right. That's what. Okay. Is nitrogen a good refrigerant? Nitrogen? No. Not that I've never heard of someone using nitrogen as a refrigerant. CO2 as a refrigerant, but yeah, I've never heard of someone using nitrogen as a refrigerant. I've never heard that before, but CO2 for sure. All right, can you change a cap tube with the AAA TXV? It really depends. Does the system have remember I talked about storage capacity of the system, right? So if you have a capillary tube on a older condensing unit, I guarantee that that condensing unit and the condenser on there wasn't sized with enough extra capacity inside that condenser to store the needed refrigerant for an expansion valve to open and close and meter the refrigerant properly. So in order to change, I mean, I'm not saying it won't work, but your best bet if you're going to put an expansion valve on a system that previously had a capillary tube is to throw a receiver on there or put a new condensing unit with a receiver, then put an expansion valve, and you'll be good to go. You can run that all day long. But just throwing a metering device on a system that has a capillary tube, that has originally a capillary tube, throwing an expansion valve on there, theoretically, you're going to run into some problems. All right, gentlemen. I think that I am going to wrap this one up. I am at my hour and a half. Oh, okay, there you go. I'll get your question real quick, Jacob. During cold temps with a walk-in cooler using a fan cycle control, is it normal to see flashing in the sight glass when the fan comes on? Yes, Jacob. That's one of the things that I don't like about fan cycle controls is they're very violent. Okay, what I mean by that is when the fans turn on and turn off, you're going to see the refrigerant move around in the system. So when it first turns off and when it first turns on, yes, you're going to see some bubbles in your sight glass, but while it's running, it should clear up. Okay. But that's one thing that I don't like about fan cycle switches is they are what I call violent in the system. I prefer a head pressure control valve because it's a lot more of a smooth flow. I'm not saying that a fan cycle control won't work, but where fan cycle controls, in my opinion, here in Southern California, we have a moderate climate. So we have it's 50 degrees outside. So what's going to happen is when that fan cycle switch shuts off the condenser fan motor, the head pressure is going to climb really quick, and then it's going to turn off really quick, and then it's going to climb really quick and turn off really quick. If we had a really, really cold climate, then there would be a bigger swing there between the on off. But in the moderate climates, when it's 50 something degrees outside, it's constantly on, off, on, off, on, off. Fan cycles, where I think they really excel, is when you have multiple condenser fan motors and you can stage the condenser fan motor. So you can shut off, say, one condenser fan motor, then the next one slowly shut it off at another pressure, and then you could slowly, instead of just on, off, on, off. But yes, you will see bubbles. So long as when the fans are running, the bubbles clear up, you're probably pretty good. So, all right, gentlemen. Is liquid nitrogen a good refrigerant because liquid nitrogen gets very cold? I've never used liquid nitrogen as a refrigerant. I'm sure there's some methods of that, but the problem, again, I'm talking out of my ass right now. I don't know all this stuff, but liquid nitrogen as a refrigerant, I believe, again, I'm going way beyond my envelope of knowledge here, but I believe liquid nitrogen becomes unstable at a certain pressure. That's why when you see the liquid nitrogen trucks going down the street, they're refrigerated because they got to keep it to keep it in the liquid state. I'm sure they got to keep it at a certain temperature. So I don't think that liquid nitrogen would work as a primary refrigerant. But again, I really can't answer that one because that is way beyond my envelope of knowledge. Okay. I could imagine someone could use liquid nitrogen maybe as a secondary refrigerant or something, but that's a whole interesting thing. That's beyond me. So, all right. Is there any advantage of 448 over 404? Hashim. Yeah, I mean, 448 is the new refrigerant. It's got lower operating pressures, lower operating pressures. But it has a high glide though. So that's something you got to get used to. But I mean, I'm using 448A out here and I have no problems with it. I really got nothing bad to say about 448A. It's just another drummer refrigerant you got to keep on your van. But as the new refrigerant restrictions change, you're going to have to start converting over to 448A, or there's some other alternatives too. But 404 is slowly being phased out, especially in California. So, all right, let me see. All right, gentlemen, I am going to wrap this up. I really, really appreciate you guys coming in here. I'm sure I'll do it. I don't know what the dates are like. I think I'll do another stream before the end of the year. But if I don't see you guys, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays if you guys celebrate Christmas. If not, Happy Holidays, whatever it is you celebrate. Remember, carbon monoxide detector is very important. And I'm going to go ahead and cue up the outro music and wrap this one up. Again, just want to say thank you so very much. Let's go ahead and transition this on over. And we will catch you guys on the next one.